Whoever thought they would live to see this day? 30 years after the end of the Revolutionary War, the White House and most of Washington, D.C. on fire. Who had done this? Ah, yes, the British. But before we actually get to this climactic scene, let's talk about how it all happened. Well, not all of it, but most of the crucial parts. Let's talk about David versus Goliath. In the old biblical story of David versus Goliath, the Philistine army had gathered to fight against Israel. A 14-year-old David, who was the son of an Israeli man, was sent to the front lines to bring back news about his brothers. But he found himself being challenged by a 9-foot-tall Philistine giant named Goliath. In the story, little David was able to beat Goliath by throwing a rock at his head and killing him. Now, our story is similar to the one of David versus Goliath, except a little bit more complicated. And little David doesn't actually get to beat the giant Goliath, though he does get some pretty good shots in. It also doesn't help that Goliath is also fighting like another Goliath on the side. I know what you're thinking. Brian, what does this have to do with the burning of the White House? Well, in this story, David is America, young, inexperienced, small, and Goliath is Great Britain, large, powerful, established, and terrifying. The United States officially declared war on Britain in 1812. This was the first time that the young nation had declared war, and it occurred for several reasons. I'll list 3 major ones. Major reason number 1, the impressment of American merchant sailors into the Royal Navy. During the Napoleonic Wars, the British Royal Navy could not count on the kind of contingent volunteers it had during peacetime. Navy life during this war wasn't exactly the most appealing way to spend a few months. Deserting became more common in the British Navy during the war, as many sailors forged documents and pretended to be naturalized American citizens on American ships. The whole concept of citizenship was a bit confusing during this time, because the country was still very young. I mean, who was considered an American? To the British, being born in Great Britain made one British, regardless of where they moved and acquired new citizenship. The British response to the nagging issue of desertment was to literally seize and search countless American ships at sea and force both deserters and those believed to be deserters to serve in the British Navy. This led to many Americans being captured and forced to serve in the British Navy. Americans were outraged at British impressment as they believed that this was a clear violation of their national sovereignty. Major reason number 2. During an ongoing major war with France, which was ruled by Napoleon, Britain brought about trade restrictions against the United States, who were actually trading with both Britain and France at this time. Some aspects of this trade restriction would even force American ships to have to dock in Great Britain if they wanted to trade with other European countries. In 1807, Britain passed the Orders in Council, which required neutral countries to obtain a license from its authorities before trading with France or French colonies. America was initially neutral, but now they were being forced to pick a side. Major reason number 3. It is believed that the British supported Native American tribes in their fight against American expansion westward into previous Native American territory, and even into Canada. It is also believed that the British supported Native American raids against American settlers who were heading out west. Even though Americans were also supporting France in the war against Britain, when the British supported Americans' enemies, this meant war. When American forces made several attempts to invade Upper and Lower Canada, the British were there to support both Native Americans and Canadians. The British were now able to adopt a more aggressive war strategy, sending more troops to the battlefront along with their distinguished elite naval force. Even more important was the fact that they also successfully defended New Orleans. The victories at the Battle of New Orleans in 1815 and the Battle of Baltimore in 1814, which inspired the lyrics of the American national anthem, the Star-Spangled Banner, created a new sense of identity for a young country which still had to define itself. The Battle of New Orleans was the final battle of the War of 1812 and was led by future President Andrew Jackson, who, though outnumbered, defeated a large British force, causing over 2,500 casualties and suffering roughly 300. This battle effectively defended the Louisiana Territory, which the U.S. had obtained from France in the Louisiana Purchase. The subsequent period after the war was seen by many Americans as a second war of independence against Britain. In America, this brought about a time period called the Era of Good Feelings, in which the Federalist Party lost further power due to their anti-war stance, and the U.S. two-party system essentially became a one-party system. Canada came out of the war with a heightened sense of national pride, along with solidarity with the British Empire, since it celebrated its defense of multiple American invasions. At the end of the war, both sides signed the Treaty of Ghent, and all parties returned occupied land to its pre-war owners. So though nothing really changed, a lot actually did. America was renewed and now had the confidence it needed to truly become a global player.